This is the World Today Weekend on CKNW News Talk 980. Once again, here's Sean Lesley.
All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the program for Sunday, September 29th. I'm indeed Sean Lesley, broadcasting from the CKNW Storm Drain here in the radio room at the legislature in beautiful downtown Victoria. On today's show, a big shift in education. We'll see atheism taught in Irish schools. Something to keep an eye on here in BC. To Ireland, where school children will be able to add atheism to their choice of courses after an historic move in the school system. 16,000 children will have the option to be taught atheism in the classroom online, or by downloading an app, making it accessible to all students who wish to take the course. Joining me now, Pat O'Brien from the Canadian Centre for Inquiry, and Michael Nugent, chairperson of Atheist Ireland, an advocacy group for atheism, reason, and ethical secularism. Gentlemen, hello. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Hi, Sean. Thank you very much for having us.
Michael Nugent, I'll start with you. Tell me about this and how this is going over in Ireland.
Well, we're getting a very good reaction. Most of the schools in Ireland are run by the Roman Catholic Church, over 90%. And they run the schools with a religious ethos that is integrated throughout the entire school day. So even if you take the option which you have to opt your child out of religious education in a formal sense, they'll still end up being taught, say, during nature study that God created the trees and the birds and the bees, and they'll be taught hymns during music class and so on. So there's one small sector of the school system, which is the Educate Together schools, which are a multi-denominational system. Now, they teach about religion in a critical and pluralistic manner, but they don't have any curriculum content about atheism. So this will be filling that gap. In the Educate Together schools, pupils will be able to learn directly about atheism, and in the other denominational schools, we'll be offering the material to parents so that they can use it themselves.
Why do you feel this is necessary?
Well, because Ireland is a country that has been unduly influenced by the Catholic Church. We have a constitution that begins with the words that all authority comes from the Holy Trinity, and that we have obligations to our Lord Jesus Christ. The President and judges have to swear a religious oath in order to take office. Religions are given exemptions from our equality laws, allowing them to discriminate on religious grounds. We have a blasphemy law that is like something out of medieval times that was just passed a couple of years ago. And so in order to help to prevent that from continuing, one of the places that enables it to continue is children being taught religious views as truth. We've no problem with being taught about religious views, but being taught religious views as truth before they reach the age of reason. And we want children to have an alternative so that they can get objective, critical and pluralistic information and can make up their own mind rather than be indoctrinated. We will be as opposed to teaching atheism as truth as we are to teaching religion as truth. You're
not teaching atheism as truth. What are you teaching? Just, what it stands for, what it's all about?
Exactly. Well, we will be teaching children what atheists believe to be true, but we won't be insisting that the children believe that it's true. We'll be giving children the information to make up their own minds in an objective, critical and pluralist manner. There's a set of principles put together by the OSCE, which is an international body that has a lot of European and North American countries associated with it, which is a set of principles called the Toledo Guiding Principles about how to teach religion in an educational context in a neutral manner. And we'll be following those principles. We will be teaching about atheism, and we'll be enabling children to have the information and the critical thinking skills to evaluate what's reliable information and what's unreliable information, and how to judge whether these claims about the creator of the universe creating a universe of 100 billion galaxies, each of which have 100 billion stars, allegedly for the benefit of one species on one small planet.
But again, this is only going to be available, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Nugent. This will only be available to a small fraction of students to start with. You're not actually getting into the majority of the religiously controlled schools.
We won't be getting directly into them. Well, we'll be offering them the course, and they will have the option to take it or reject it. We suspect strongly that they will reject it, but we will be able to make the information available and the course content available to parents who want their children to have an alternative. See, what we have here in Ireland, there is an option to opt your child out of religious education, but if you do so, The school takes no responsibility for what happens to the child during that time. You have to supervise the child yourself. You have to give them alternative material to study. So we'll be able to give parents in the religious schools who want to opt their child out of that religious education, faith formation, which is how it is structured in the religious schools, give them alternatives where they can learn in a more rational way about the different things that different people believe.
It's fascinating. Pat O'Brien, director of the Canadian Centre for Inquiry's BC chapter. Pat, what do you is there anything we can learn here? Because of course the majority of kids in British Columbia go to public schools where they're not really taught, as I understand it, religion. But should we be adopting some of this here in BC?
Well, Sean, as you know, the BC school system is officially secular. That's
yes.
right in the legislation. So the teaching of religion is problematic here in British Columbia because you'd have to get around that particular part of the legislation. The way to get around it, of course, is to do what Atheist Ireland and Mr. Nugent are doing, which is, and I think the key term here is teach about atheism, not teach atheism. And I think you can do the same for all different types of religions and worldviews. Teach about them, teach what they say and what they believe. And I think what you'll get is something that comes right out of what Mr. Nugent referred to, the Toledo guiding principles, which are objectivism, pluralism, and critical thinking. You'll get kids who will understand that their little friend who looks different, who wears different clothes, who has a different set of beliefs, is actually they'll understand why they believe those things and how they believe them, and it'll make for I think a better society. You only need to look a little further north from where Mr. Nugent lives, to Northern Ireland, to see how even within a particular religion, how when children are taught from a very young age that not only are those other kids different, but they have the wrong religion or the wrong way of looking at the world, that it creates just a horrible situation for society.
Michael Nugent, Pat O'Brien, please stand by. I must take a break. I'm fascinated by this topic, and I do welcome your calls, comments, questions. At what age, or is it ever appropriate to indoctrinate children into religious views?
This is the World Today Weekend on CKNW News Talk 980. Once again, here's Sean Lesley.
All right, stick around after the 2:30 news. We'll tell you if you can get on the ferry this afternoon with the coming wind and rainstorm. We'll talk to Deb Marshall at BC Ferries. That's in about 10 minutes' time. Right now we're talking about teaching atheism in schools in Ireland. Michael Nugent with us, chairperson of Atheist Ireland, and Pat O'Brien with the Canadian Centre for Inquiry BC chapter. Michael Nugent, I just want to get back to this. The role of the church, the Catholic Church in schools in Ireland. Well, I mean, do they pay for the school system? Why are they still in control of so much education in Ireland?
It's almost a historical hangover. When the 1937 Irish Constitution was passed, it included a whole load of references, including one that has since been deleted about the special position of the Catholic Church. But it also includes a clause where the Irish state in the Constitution doesn't provide education. The phrase is it provides for education. And the way that it provides for education is it effectively franchises it out to private bodies, which in over 90% of the cases are Catholic bishops. So the Catholic bishops run the schools, they employ the teachers, they set the ethos of the school, but in a bizarre sort of situation, the state pays for all of that. The state pays for the maintenance of the schools, the state pays for the teacher salaries, and yet the religious organisations dictate the ethos of the school.
You said there's a blasphemy law passed. That sounds like Yemen or Saudi Arabia. How does that work?
It does. Again, this is a hang-up from our Constitution. We have a clause in our Constitution saying that blasphemy is an offence which will be punishable in accordance with law. And the courts had found that the law that had been passed was unworkable because the definition of the offence wasn't contained in the Act. And so instead of trying to hold a constitutional referendum to remove that from our Constitution, our government decided a couple of years ago to define blasphemy and add in a new blasphemy law. And the real danger of that is that it doesn't just affect Ireland. The Islamic states at the United Nations have for decades now been trying to make defamation of religion a crime internationally.
Yes, they have.
When we passed our law, the Islamic states at the United Nations started incorporating the wording of the Irish law into what they want passed internationally, and started saying, look, here's a Western democracy passing a blasphemy law in the 21st century. There's nothing morally unusual about that. There's no reason why we shouldn't have blasphemy laws in our countries. And of course, in those countries, people get beaten up, get imprisoned, or can get executed or murdered for alleged blasphemy offences.
Pat O'Brien, blasphemy laws in the 21st century? What in the heck? That's my clever question. That's just because it stuns me that it's even discussed.
It just shows what a hold certain religions have over certain governments. You mentioned Yemen and Saudi Arabia, but it's the same in Bangladesh and I believe Pakistan as well. And you'll notice that those particular countries are all Islamic countries. It's interesting that the Catholic Church would be interested in such a regressive measure, given that they have a new pope who seems to be doing his best to try and drag them kicking and screaming into the 21st century.
Yeah, Michael Nugent, I asked you off the top about the reaction. I'm curious about the reaction of the Catholic Church to what you're trying to do. Has there been any vocal reaction, or are they just kind of saying, okay, then no problem?
Well, I suppose that they will be trying to pretend it isn't happening. I would imagine this is probably their best strategy in the short term. A Catholic theologian from the Nugent, which is where the Irish Catholic hierarchy is based, wrote a course for primary school teachers that was published last year in a teacher training college in Ireland that included statements that for example, that atheism is responsible for the worst horrors that history has ever witnessed. And
oh, yeah.
So that is how they like to portray atheism, as something that is immoral, and try to not recognize that atheism is not only not immoral, but is actually based on a natural morality, based on compassion and empathy and reciprocity and cooperation and fairness, rather than based on what somebody says that the creator of the universe told them 2,000 years ago. So I suspect that their position will be to try to ignore it, but effectively what we are trying to do is bypass that by going directly to parents and saying, if you as parents want your children to have an objective, critical and pluralist education about religions and atheism, then we'll give you that option directly.
You know, allow me to play devil's advocate, if I can say this. If I am a staunchly religious person, should I be afraid that my kids will be exposed to atheist or agnostic thought and won't grow up to follow in my tracks and be a member of that religion? Either one of you on that?
There's quite an irony in Ireland, because at the moment atheists are the parents who have to try to opt their child out of the indoctrination that they're getting.
That's right.
Schools. So if Catholics feel that they want to opt their children out from an objective, critical and pluralist education, obviously that's their right. I mean, we can't or wouldn't want to force them to do that, but we will be providing the alternative so that parents will have a genuine choice.
Yeah, and education is the key here. I think if you give kids the option, eventually they'll figure it out. But I believe there's something like 16,000 children it's possible could be getting these courses. That's probably a small enough critical mass that eventually, they're going to see each other on the soccer fields and in the playgrounds, and these kids are going to start talking, and it won't be long before the parents are talking, and there'll be a wave, I think, that will take over. At least I'm hoping. I'm sure Michael hopes also that this will just gain momentum, and people will start to realize that there's a part of their children's education that's missing, and they'll start asking for it in the publicly funded Catholic schools as well.
I think it's fascinating that we're talking more and more about lack of religion, humanism, agnosticism, atheism, whatever you want to call it, in recent years. So much so that I saw the former Pope Benedict lashing out at Richard Dawkins, saying he writes science fiction. I mean, Pope Francis seems to be a breath of fresh air, but there's still a lot of religious figures in the world, I think, who are looking at this kind of growth of the expression of atheism with great concern, Michael Nugent.
Well, I think what is happening is that what you might call moderate religion is coming under pressure from reason, in terms of the scientific advances that are overtaking previous religious interpretations of reality, and ethical secularism taking over from the previous belief that we need religion in order to be good. And as people are realizing that neither of those two things are correct, two things are happening. Some people are drifting off at one end and becoming more secular, and some people are drifting off at the other end and becoming more fundamentalist. So simultaneously you have both of those two things happening, and the contradictions of moderate religion, I think, will mean that the middle won't be able to hold.
Michael Nugent, Pat O'Brien, great to talk to you, gentlemen. Thanks for coming on today. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Good
You're
to meet
welcome.
you.
Thank you.
Michael Nugent, chairperson of Atheist Ireland. Pat O'Brien, a friend of the show. He's with the Canadian Centre for Inquiry.
This is the World Today Weekend on CKNW News Talk 980. Once again, here's Sean Lesley.